Okay, we are interviewing Sheriff Dean Roesler, who's been Sheriff of Muskegon County for 4 years. Prior to that, he was the Under-Sheriff of Muskegon County for a period of time. Dean, tell us a little about your background.
Okay, well, as you hit on, Sheriff for 4 years, just over 4 years. I took office as Sheriff in April of 2008. Prior to that, I was Under-Sheriff for 5 years. Came into the Under-Sheriff's office in April 2003. But so I'll go way back and then work to the Under-Sheriff. Graduated of Muskegon High School up on north end of the county in 1983. Went from high school into Muskegon Community College. Took some training as an EMT paramedic. Started my first full-time career, if you will, as a paramedic here in Muskegon County, while continuing to go to school. Did the paramedic gig for 6 years full-time and then 2 years part-time while I continued to go to school. Went to Grand Valley State University for my law enforcement training. Graduated from the police academy from there in 1990. The first police job was in the city of Whitehall. I worked there for about 4 months after the police academy, and also worked part-time a little bit at Muskegon Township Police Department during that same time frame. And then in November 1990, I was hired into the city of Muskegon as a full-time officer and spent just short of 13 years at the city in various capacities. I was a patrol officer, obviously, a field training officer, evidence tech, detective sergeant, and then I was promoted to a lieutenant, put in charge of the night shift command. Was appointed acting captain for a brief period of time over there, and then again, as I started to lead into in 2003, I was tapped to become the Under-Sheriff for the county. So that's when I left my city career.
And you come from a law enforcement background. Is there anybody in your family that's not a member of law enforcement somewhere?
Yeah. It's unique. I'm very proud of my family and the tradition of service that we have. I do have one brother who, although he's not a police officer, he is a firefighter / paramedic, so he's kind of in that same fold. But other than that, it's, we tend, for a lot of reasons, we being my brothers and my cousins and now my nephews and cousins' kids and whatnot, seem to gravitate towards public service. And we had really good role models with my father and my uncles and other people from the community. So
we have a topic that's been kind of floating around the county on a casual basis, something about a need for a new jail. Do you know anything about that?
Basis, yeah.
You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, well, it's really not a new topic. I'm sure we would all agree. It seems to be a fight that's been going on for most of my law enforcement career. But the situation we're in is the current facility was constructed in 1958, and I think the first inmate population actually took up space there like 1961. And of course, back in the 1950s, when jails were operating and being designed, there was a little bit of different philosophy on the purpose of the jail, as well as a very different type of population that jails were dealing with. Primarily were short-term holds, misdemeanors, kind of a quick turnaround. And then as society progressed or digressed or whatever, you could have debate that whole philosophy of corrections. We and I say this in broad terms, the inmate population really became much more diverse and much larger in numbers, as well as the seriousness of the offense. And we were seeing many more females than I think was ever anticipated for that facility. And of course, a lot of things over the years in terms of policy shifts at the, say, federal and state levels in terms of mental health and mental illness and how we deal with that. We decentralized a very large population of mental health individuals out of state-run institutions to try and mainstream them back into the communities. And those policies, continue to shift and change, and ultimately what happens is a lot of the mental health population can't sustain themselves in the community, and they end up coming to jail for a variety of reasons. And so that's something that the facility was never really designed for. And so you have the whole issue of the population that we're dealing with, and it's like I said, it's a building that's been in operation, say, since 1961, but it's been in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's never, it's never gone into hibernation. It's never gotten any rest. And so the infrastructure, the original infrastructure there has pretty much lived this life. The pipes were constantly dealing with pipes breaking and water pipes, cracking. The electrical infrastructure is not what it should be. And in fact, we're limited in some of the updates that we want to do because of the age of the infrastructure there. Over the years, it's not like nothing's ever been done to the facility. I don't want to say it's never been maintained. I mean, it's maintained. We pass our state inspections every year. There's always some issue that we have to deal with, but we pass the inspections. There have been some additions over the years since the original structure went up. And one of the biggest addition, or the biggest expansions, was after a lawsuit, a judgment on a lawsuit back in the early 90s under Sheriff Carter. And a housing unit was put in what's now actually what is the basement of the Hall of Justice, which is directly connected to the jail building. And that housing unit is, it's in a separate building, although there's a doorway walkway between the jail building and the other building. And that houses 160 minimum security, low security, work release type inmates, all males for that housing unit. But one of the concerns that somehow was either missed or an oversight was that particular housing unit is on the county building's HVAC system, heating and ventilation system.
Was that okay? That's
so.
We had somebody else's board.
So of course on the weekends when the county dials down the thermostat or dials up the thermostat.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I was going to be really unintrusive.
That particular housing unit is on that system. So when all the employees go home for the weekend at the county and they don't want to have the air conditioning running at 72, so they turn it up to 78 or whatever, for legitimate reasons. Well, of course, that affects the population that's living there, and it's a real issue, especially with this heat wave that we're in. The jail infrastructure HVAC system again is very old, and because of the kind of the hodgepodge nature of the different remodels and stuff, that HVAC system has a hard time keeping up with the demand, and during these hot stretches, it really becomes a concern, not just for the inmate population, but on any given day I have 25, 30 employees that are working in that facility as well, and a lot of outside defense attorneys, probation officers, therapists, visitors, all those coming through. So there's the desire to kind of keep pace with where society is at now in terms of technology and different philosophies about inmate management. It's just about impossible to do in that current physical structure. And there's a whole another piece too. I mean, I'm not sure how much time I have, but
Half hour.
okay.
Well, we have some questions.
Okay, understood. And the limitation of that space, we've actually turned closets into offices and offices into housing units, so because of those space limitations, then the ability to have some inmate programs that may reduce recidivism is very, very limited. So if you want to ask further, I can go into further.
Okay, numbers of the jail. Now, prior to this, the basement of the county building being turned into jail space, there's approximately 250 beds, give or take.
Yeah, the state authorized number now is 370, and that expansion or that addition 160, so 290, I think was.
Okay, so right now, after the expansion, we've got what, about 400 population, give or take?
We run, the average daily population now is right around 405.
Okay.
When I get to the gritty number.
Right, so just talking numbers, let's say that not facility, but just numbers, we jumped from about 250 to 400, and all this talk I'm hearing of a new jail says, well, we ought to make that 500 or 600. What's the problem here? The population of the county hasn't gone up that much.
No, but what we're seeing, what's happening is and I'm a visual guy, so I wish I had something charted out, but we're doing early releases almost on a daily basis. We're releasing 40, 50 people early in a week. Sometimes more, sometimes less. There's an average there. And they're being released without having completed their full sentence, and they're being released without any type of, preparation to re-enter the community. So if we had space to meet the court's demands in terms of commitments, and then space to cut back on the early releases, I don't know that we'll ever get to a point where we could just flat out stop early releases, because there's a lot of variables that go into that, good time and such. But if we could at least cut back, by half early releases, that's and look at that. If you look at the early release population plus the committed population, confined population, that's kind of where that 500 to 600 number comes with. And that's that's a pretty broad, 500 to 600. That's a lot of leeway.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we're going through now is with this consulting group, is they're looking at all the programmings, the history of releases, the history of commitments, the charging history, the bond history of the courts, and we're hoping they can come up with a little more definitive number. We had a study done 2007, started in 2006, they authored it in 2007, which gave us that kind of 500 to 600 number of immediate need, and then they looked at a 20 to 25 year build out based on what was happening in 2007 in terms of again, sentencing decisions, bonding decisions, programs, and lack of programs, if you will. And I personally am not real comfortable with that particular study. I was undersheriff at the time. I had some questions about it. The group that's doing the study now, they're reviewing all that information and trying to see what they can validate based on their information they're getting. So that's where those numbers are coming from.
Now, how many of the population of the jail are in there temporarily? And by temporarily, I mean an officer arrests them, they sit there, they bond out. And I'm speaking of the ones that bond out, how long does that take? A day or two? How much of the population fluctuates daily?
Well, I guess I can go back and try and pull some solid numbers together, but generally, with an arrest, you're brought before the judge. If it's a warrantless arrest, there's two different things we're talking about. If it's a warrantless arrest, you're brought before the judge within 24 to 48 hours for your what they call the arraignment, and at that arraignment, the judge will set a bond. Okay, may set a bond depending on again what the charge is. But
exactly.
Let's just take the basic misdemeanor, driving while license suspended.
Okay,
that's a common one. Person will go in front of the judge within 24 hours. Judge says, all right, your bond is $7,500. Okay, and the purpose of the bond, of course, is to ensure that the person is going to come back to the next court appearance. Because of the overcrowding situation and the population, the judges have in standing order that anything less than an $8,000 bond is automatically now a PR bond. So even though they're saying your bond is $7,500, what it is, it's an automatic signature bond, PR bond, right? Personal recognizance bond. If it's a type of charge where the bond is $8,000 on up to $1 million, again, it's all depending on the type of charge or the number of charges, etc. History of the person that's coming in front of the judge, lots of different things. Then that person stays in jail until they make the bond, whether it's a cash surety bond or 10%. Say it's a $8,000, 10%. They have to come up with $800. If it's cash surety, then they have to come up with the whole $8,000 or something of value of $8,000. So, to give you strict numbers right off the top of my head, I guess I'm not prepared to do that. We can try and pull those together. But what we're seeing is, let's just use 400 as a flat number. It's an easy one to compute and stuff. Of the 400 inmates, 300 of them are in there on some type of felony commitment,
right.
Whether it's a pretrial felony or a sentenced felony.
Okay.
And that's a whole other discussion.
Right,
I don't have
exactly.
time for. So about 100 are in
Fluctuating.
on some type. But it's generally a 3 to 1 population.
Well, okay, you have a lot of authority being sheriff, and you can say to the road patrol officers, look, if you arrest somebody for possession of marijuana, retail fraud, driving with license suspended, open receptacle, some of these, I'm going to call them minor misdemeanors, don't bring them here, I'm not taking them, issue them an appearance ticket.
Well, yeah, some cases, charges can be done on an appearance ticket basis.
But
right?
you could
we
order.
do that. There is an order.
There is an order.
Yeah, there is a policy in place that if it's something that can be done on an appearance ticket, then the agencies need to do that. Some of the problem is sometimes we end up dealing with people with multiple offenses. One could be an appearance ticket, but the other one still requires them to be lodged. And so and if they're going to lodge them, then rather than write an appearance ticket, we just lodge on both because eventually they're going to
be there anyway.
Right. We do have in place like a retail fraud diversion process. Say it's a first offense retail fraud. They're not minor. I mean, our merchants or business.
There's
people.
a victim there.
Yeah.
It's not minor, but it's not like it's somebody broke into your house at midnight.
Those individuals are screened for what kind of history we're dealing with, and then there's a diversion process that we work with through the prosecutor's office that says, okay, you're not gonna be in jail, you're not gonna sit in jail, you're not gonna be charged, but here's what you're gonna do, and if you do that, then all's good. So we do have that kind of effort in place for low risk property type crimes. So
let's go to another subject real quick. The letter policy that you instituted. Now, I'm assuming that from the time the jail was built in the 50s, that anytime somebody wanted to get a letter that was in jail, they just wanted somebody on the outside just wrote them a letter, maybe included family pictures with that or something. And obviously it's going to be checked for contraband because sometimes people get a little bit sneaky and think they're going to get something in jail. It doesn't belong there. Mm-hmm. You recently said no more letters. You can send postcards in, and you can get legal mail in.
Right, legal and person.
What was there a problem with a lot of contraband coming in?
There was an issue with contraband and pornography and problems with various witness intimidation issues, threats and whatnot, as the population expands, as you can understand, obviously the workload increases on the staff because we're not dealing with just letters coming in. We have medications that have to be passed, and visits that have to be scheduled and people brought down for visits. So as the population gets bigger, there's all kinds of the demand expands on the staff, except the staff doesn't expand, equally. We're not budgetary wise, and I'm not proposing that we increase our staffing levels. We had to look at some ways to make efficiencies and still protect the security of the facility, and in reviewing what was happening with some of the things that were coming in, matches, pornographic pictures, different little efforts to hide powdery substance behind the stamps or on the gum of the envelope, and looking at some of the other policies around other jails around Michigan and the country and how they're dealing with it. That's where this came from.
Well, I realize that you've got, I've heard from most people they never have enough staff. I don't care what type of business, whether it's government, private, or whatever.
Right.
But the jail in the evening, and I'm talking like nighttime, midnight to 6 in the morning, most of the inmates are sound asleep. There's got to be some downtime there. And even if it takes like maybe another day or two to get the letter to the inmate, wouldn't it make more sense to say, look, and I'm looking at the letters policy from a standpoint of staff management, to where if you've got somebody that gets a letter from his family, he's looking at pictures of his family, and you've got somebody now that's not as much of a management problem as you would if there's not the communication from the family and they don't have the pictures to look at of their family, and they're liable to cause the staff more problem. The tension's going to increase, and with the tension rising as well as the heat index rising, it's going to lead to a fight. How could it not?
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand the philosophy that you have. I really do. But I want to get back to, you may think, like, especially in the evening hours, there's a lot of downtime, but if you ever come in and observe nighttime operations, you realize that that's really not the case. During that so-called downtime, now staff is scheduling all the appearances for the next days, the court appearances, the visitations, the attorney visits. They're picking up the laundry, gathering up old towels or whatever has to be gathered up. They're setting up the medication schedule for the passing of the medications. So there's really not a lot of downtime. I mean, it's a different type of work than the daytime operation, but they're still very busy.
So you don't anticipate bringing the letters back in?
Not in the current facility. If everything were to stay the same, then my letter policy would stay the same. If we could bring in technology and infrastructure to where we could institute emails and this thing called the VizBox, which is a large looking TV set, if you will, that has a microphone and camera, where visitations can take place right in the cell rather than having to move people off the cell block to the visiting booths down on the main floor. If we could implement a lot of that stuff so that now staff time is freed up because they're not doing all these movements. The visitations are taking place right there. The visitation hours can now be expanded. Because right now we're only doing visitations, Monday through Friday, basically 8:30 to 4:30 during jail business operational hours.
Right.
So we could expand visitation late in the evening and on the weekends because we don't have that staff demand that we can't cover. So if we could improve on some other things where we have staff time, as you suggested, then I would certainly revisit it.
What makes you different than the two opponents you have?
Well, I think my background and my training and my education, my experience, I'm the only currently licensed police officer. My two opponents are former police officers, and of course, state law doesn't require the sheriff to be a police officer, but I think it does give us somewhat of an advantage. I've been in the sheriff's office now 4 years. I understand the operation, I understand the demands, I understand the budgetary concerns, both within the sheriff's itself and the county government. I've done the job. I've had a good history of supervisory and management at different levels throughout the law enforcement side of the operation. I've been to national training in terms of jail administration, the National Sheriff's Institute. So I've pursued that kind of education, and I've never retired early from a job and then decided I wanted to come back. I've been consistent. I've never walked away from a challenge. I've dealt with a lot of challenges. I understand that people are going to have differences of opinions on how I see things and how I operate things. And I think if you talk to a lot of people, they'll recognize that in the end, we can all agree to disagree, but I'm willing to have an open mind and continue the discussion. I think I differ in that respect from at least one of the other opponents.
About 2 weeks ago, there was a police officer involved shooting in Norton Shores where the officer shot and then the gentleman later passed away. And if I recall correctly, it was because he was holding a sword up over his head. He hadn't threatened the officers with it as to where he was going to come at them with it, pointing it at them. So that's one question that just based on that alone, was it necessary for him to be shot? And then the second question is, this same officer that shot this gentleman, he shot somebody else less than 18 months ago, and that man also died. Now, does that set off an alarm, some type of concern in your mind about that particular officer?
It's really difficult to comment on this most recent event because I don't think all the facts, all the information isn't in. I wasn't there at the start of the event. I mean, I showed up later to assist with whatever we could assist with. So I wasn't there gathering. The state police are handling that investigation.
Right.
So, but as I said, as I'm quoted in the paper, the officer must have perceived some type of threat to himself or someone else. I mean, that's the long and short of it. What led him to perceive that threat, I have no idea. Again, I don't have all the facts. I haven't read any reports. I didn't do any witness interviews, anything like that. So, I'm not trying to dodge it,
right.
But I really don't think it's proper for me to render an opinion on when I don't have all the. I wouldn't want somebody making an opinion if they don't have all the facts on me.
Just take the fact that it's the same officer,
Yeah.
2 deaths, 18 months.
Yeah.
Isn't that just that factor a bit suspicious?
Not to me, because it seems very unusual for this area. But if you look at the big picture, those kind of situations do occur. There are officers that go through their entire career without having to fire a shot. And there are officers, throughout different agencies throughout the country that end up in multiple confrontations. So it's circumstance driven. I can't, and I don't know all the circumstances for either of the events really, because we're talking about another officer from another agency. Now personally, I know the individual from being in the law enforcement circles, and in my opinion, he's a very level-headed, very calm, dedicated police officer.
Can we make do with the jail if it's just remodeled?
If it's just remodeled, I guess I would have to get an idea of what just remodeled means, because again, the structure is one of the biggest obstacles.
It'd be the same building, same amount of bed space, but we're going to go through it and these problems that...
Are they gonna, if they're gonna go through it and, tear out everything old and put in everything new, theoretically could we make do with it? I guess in theory, but again, now we're talking about a huge cost, I would believe, to remodel that old facility, because again, we're not talking plaster walls and beams and studs and walls that can be moved. We're talking poured concrete,
Right.
And then while that's happening, what do we do with the inmate population? Now we have to displace the inmate population to another facility or outside beds. So you say could it? I could sit here and say yeah, it could, but again, I don't know the whole perspective.
Okay, some of my questions right now, and actually it was you that had told me that it's about 65% of the inmates are pretrial. Do you consider that to be a good amount? Should it be lower, higher?
I would like to see it lower. I would like to see some pretrial alternatives rather than incarceration. We are looking at making more use of tether, for instance.
Okay.
The bonds are reviewed by statute at 21 days. There's an automatic bond review, so that's being closely watched.
Okay. Could that be? Have you been seeing much problem with the bonds being set with the review process?
No, quite honestly, I think we have a good bench. We have a good group of judges who do their due diligence when they make their bond decisions. One of the problems we're dealing with is because it is a large pretrial population, but it's a large felony pretrial population. That's one of the stresses on the whole jail and the whole system is we're dealing with a lot of felons that, again, the jail facility itself wasn't really designed for. So.
Now, because you mentioned that, is it required, even though that it's a felony, but it's non-violent, is it required that they be kept in the jail?
No, there's no specific requirement. I mean, that's up to the decisions of our judges, and the judges make their bond decisions based not just solely on the immediate charge, immediate offense, but there's a review of the person's history, what kind of history does this person have, if they had issues before, have they shown tendencies towards violence, or and on and on and on. There's several things that a judge goes through before he makes a bond decision. Okay. And like I said, I believe we have a very strong bench from the circuit court to the family court to the probate court right down to the district court. And it's district court that gets tasked primarily with setting the bonds. Circuit court, when a felony case makes it to circuit court or is sent it to circuit court, certainly that circuit court judge has the authority to review the bond and make a bond decision. But our district court judges, I think, do a pretty decent job.
Okay. I don't recall the answer, but I really wonder for this. What is your opinion on housing prisoners from either the state of Michigan or from the federal government?
What is my opinion?
Yeah.
I wish we could do it. I wish we had the facility and the infrastructure and the ability to do it. What I'm seeing, or every indication out of Lansing is, we may be doing more of that because of, again, policy shifts at the state level. And a lot of what we end up doing is driven by state and federal policy, state federal regulation, state and federal policy. I don't want to do it at the risk of, or the limitation of, having enough bed space for our judges and our needs in the community. I mean, I don't want to have a 600 bed facility and 200 are now federal/state prisoners, and so we still only have 400 that we had before. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But if we could work out a partnership and get some type of agreement with, say, the state or the feds that, okay, we have a 550 bed facility for our needs, and then we have 50 beds here for state/federal needs, and then there's a source of revenue potentially to cover some of those operational costs, but not. I don't want to see an expansion in jail beds. Number one, just to solely lock more people up. I want to see an expansion in jail beds to deal with the population that we have, get the programs in place, and certainly if it could be structured right, where the local needs are taken care of. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's my responsibility. That's my objective: get the local needs taken care of. And if we're able to partner with the state, again, our federal government, and help them out with some of their parolees or lower level, whatever policies come on Lansing, how we end up dealing with that. Mm-hmm. I am a proponent of that.
Okay. Have you looked at it all about the possibility of sending some of our prisoners to some of the other counties?
We have, and the county used to do that. They used to send, I think, all sentenced males, I think it was, back during the time when this lawsuit was occurring, went to Calhoun County. Okay. But it ran up to be like a $2.5 million demand on the budget every year. And I think that's money that's better kept in the community in some way, shape, or form, to be honest with you.
Okay. Do you happen to know about how many prisoners that we were sending over there at the time? If you know, that's fine.
I don't know, but I know I can get my hands on information.
I'll get that later. I have that because you happen to know that part. That's something I would eventually like to know. We talked about the rest of that. So the rest of the questions I think we've already talked about. Okay, you talked about increasing the tether and reviewing it every 21 days. Is there any other things that from your experience on the jail side that can be done to help divert the people?
Oh,
while
yeah,
waiting?
yeah. There's, you know, one of the things that I'm most excited about that has really shown a lot of results is our mental health diversion efforts for individuals that have a variety of mental health conditions. We have a full-time person through community mental health that's basically assigned to the jail to review those the cases for those individuals, identify what services they need, work with the judges to divert them to you know, home placement or state facility if that's what's needed. And in 2007, just before I became sheriff, when I was under sheriff, we were diverting through the mental health diversion. We were diverting about 46 to 48 that year, and currently, as of yesterday, because I pulled the numbers for a different event, we were at 168 diversions, and it looks like we're on track to probably hit 200, which will be the highest number since my time. So yeah, those efforts are underway. We did have a federal earmark which helped fund a screening and assessment process. Some screeners were placed in the jail to screen new arrests and identify again what theoretically what brought them there and what would help them stay out, and if they were going to be a risk, and make some decisions about diverting them to other programs. With a lot of our felony population, the judges look at what's called KPEP, the Kalamazoo. It's a alternative incarceration. It's the old Muskegon temporary prison out by Mercy Hospital.
Okay.
KPEP runs that.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of our, I won't say a lot, I mean many of our felony population end up being diverted over there.
That's good to hear. All right. Well, he's not here right now, but is there anything else you'd like to say? Because those are, I think, the questions that both of us had.
Well, I would like to say that I understand when you're in a public position and you're talking about money. I understand you're talking about the people's money. I truly do. And I actually consider myself to be somewhat of a fiscal conservative. And I do my best to do the best with the money that people give me. So I do recognize that.